AIDMs? You speak madness, rules lawyer. I released a video recently on Baldur's Gate 3's massive success and how it threatens the profitability of Wizards of the Coast Virtual Tabletop, or VTT. I said that WOTC's plan to make the VTT profitable by video gamifying Dungeons & Dragons would fail. While saying that, I said that they would rely on AI, artificial intelligence, DMs to run games for players. While my main point was generally accepted, there were some commenters who were incredulous, including this one. This person said, "As for AI DMs, there's zero proof of this. None. The fact that there's swaths of YouTubers pushing this narrative speaks to where their interests lie, garnering views by attacking a brand. It's vitriolic and derisive, and does not help this hobby space in any way. God forbid that content creators would attack a brand." And let's be real, when some people demand proof of something that they don't want to believe might happen, they require a flat-out admission, which of course we're not going to hear at this point. During the OGL debacle, Wizards of the Coast responded to the rumor of AI DMs by saying, "No one at Wizards is working on AI DMs." That was a deliberate choice of words, because as it turns out, we've since heard that Hasbro has been partnering with a company called Explored to bring AI possibly to Dungeons & Dragons. When there was uproar among D&D players, Hasbro made clear that the deal with Explored does not extend to D&D, which itself is a qualified statement and does not preclude any future deals. But they did say in the initial rollout of this news, in this article that I show now, when asked, in a similar vein, has any thought been given to how this could be utilized for long-running franchises like D&D or Arkham Horror? Their senior vice president said, "We feel that the applications of this new technology will allow us to both enrich our current portfolio of games and expand our horizons to entirely new games. We can't say much more than that for now, but we are very excited for the innovations to come." So as a community, we trust their recent denials about as much as we should be trusting them since the OGL debacle. Because let's remember, before the news leaked about what their new OGL would be, which in reality would revoke the current OGL, they said in December 21st of last year, if you're making commercial content, relatively little is going to change for most creators. And they said, bottom line, the OGL is not going away, which we soon learned would be a lie. And when it was revealed that third-party publishers were being pressured to sign a terrible gaming license within a matter of days, Kyle Brink of D&D Beyond came out and claimed that that was a draft sent out to creators. And he sticks by this explanation. And he's the apologist for Wizards of the Coast, the person being presented to us as the person to trust. Nor can we trust a company that sends armed thugs to illegally confiscate fans' property. So no, we do not trust any of Wizards of the Coast's denial at this point. I had to get that out of the way. So I released my video about Baldur's Gate 3 threatening the profitability of VTT. And most commenters were in agreement, but I did get one fair objection to the points I was making, and it was this. Basically, they pointing out how Baldur's Gate 3 and the modding community around it, even if it were to create a DM mode, would not equal a dedicated VTT in being convenient to dungeon masters to create their own unique content, maps, adventures for their players. The VTT will be designed to be more user-friendly than any modding can possibly be. This person makes that point and points out that the new D&D VTT is ahead of any competitor, at least when it comes to D&D. This next comment makes a similar point. You cannot make maps easily or design dungeons within Baldur's Gate 3. At best, BG3 will likely be a limited-use DM tool where you can run stories with some of the existing tools. You won't be able to creatively build your own adventures. I'm sorry, all this talk about BG3 potentially ruining WOTC is just silly. And so they're pushing back against the main point in my last video, that Baldur's Gate 3 will threaten the success of Wizards of the Coast VTT because it doesn't really compete as a VTT. So I think I need to expand on the points I was making in that first video, and make this video. those commenters were right. I don't think the Baldur's Gate 3 modding community will replace a VTT as a tool for current D&D dungeon masters. But I do think the VTT will already have trouble attracting DMs for the reasons I'll go in this video. Second, I want to make clear that Wizards of the Coast's plan is to chase the video game market. Dungeon masters and giving them a tool is secondary in the eyes of corporate. And this is what Baldur's Gate 3's massive success threatens. So, will the VTT be a great tool for dungeon masters? And this I have to challenge. As has been pointed out by other creators, Wizards of the Coast has tried to make a virtual tabletop before, and it failed. About 15 years ago, Hasbro was chasing World of Warcraft dollars and wanted to create a paid monthly subscription service that included an online VTT. People who want to understand how history is repeating itself should check out Dungeons and Discourse's video. And I would also point out to this next video that systematically goes through the challenges facing WOTC's VTT and why it's almost certainly going to fail. Their video is not very long, and it has these chapters which summarize their argument. First, hardware requirements will be an issue for many DMs. Second, it'll be hard on GMs trying to prep. Preparing a map in a 3D environment and meeting the expectations of players in a 3D environment is much more difficult. Here's a short clip from their video.
Translating your ideas as a GM into rendered 3D environments is at best time-consuming when you have all the right tools, and at worst extremely difficult or impossible because your tool set is awkward and your assets are limited. And by assets I mean renderable 3D objects you have at your disposal to place in the world. Walls, floors, traps, treasure chests, monsters, small objects. Compare this to a 2D VTT, which uses image files to represent the world. If you've ever GM'd a game and used a VTT with 2D maps and character tokens, you know that even that method can take a lot of time. But that prep time pales in comparison to doing it in 3D. Dungeon Masters will realize this harsh reality in WOTC's tabletop app the moment they try to express their imagination outside the bounds of whatever limited starting assets they're given.
Dave's other points are that software is not Wizards of the Coast's wheelhouse. It would be a laborious, labor-draining video game. They won't get the complexity right. Wizards of the Coast is cheap with their products, and WOTC is not to be trusted. And I would say that it's dubious whether 3D adds much to the tabletop gaming experience. It's like an uncanny valley effect. Because the 3D representation is so realistic, your eyes are focused on that, and how it fails to meet the word pictures in your mind becomes more apparent. And what is a DM to do if you have this map and set of encounters prepared and the players decide to go left instead of right? What if a player wants to cast an illusion spell or an enemy NPC? How would that be represented on the screen? If there is no asset available, should the player and the GM limit what they would create as an illusion? What if there are dramatic changes to the scenery? It's easy enough to describe in words how a transmute rock to mud spell will cause a wall to collapse into a cavern, or a spell redirects a river. How are we to represent that in our 3D rendered scene? What if in the middle of the conversation, the DM decides to add to the character of an NPC and describe physical features like a scar or a missing limb? Already these are challenges within a 2D VTT, and I've dealt with those myself. However, the expectations go up in a 3D environment, and the time and money possibly involved in representing what's in the mind's eye increase. There is an excellent article from someone who was at the D&D Creators Summit early in 2023 by Alphastream. I'll include a link to this article in the video description. Included are exchanges that they had with one of the developers of the VTT. On 3D assets, Kale says he doesn't expect that we can import or offer for sale our own 3D maps. Apparently, third-party 3D maps can stress the engine too much. The expectation is that all maps come from Wizards. However, there will be a marketplace for the VTT, which the author thinks might only be for adventures. But apparently, because it's a 3D engine, it will not be that easy for it to incorporate third-party 3D assets into it. And this all points to how a lot of these assets will probably have to be either purchased a la carte from Wizards or be unlocked through a subscription. Here we have the danger of the walled garden. And when asked about the costs of the VTT for consumers, they hemmed and hawed. Alphastream's summaries on the screen, but they basically avoided answering. And I will point out that there is a 3D virtual tabletop under development called Tailspire, and they already have a partnership with Hero Forge, a popular online service where people can make 3D models of their player characters, which also seems further ahead than WOTC's VTT in that they already have a playtest and are working with DMs on how better to serve DMs in that VTT. Speaking of the timelines, at the time of the Creators Summit, which I believe was in March of 2023, they were saying that the focus this year is to support core mechanics and DM game controls. It would only be next year that they would look at encounter and world building. Basically, the side that DMs engage with in creating an adventure would be later, and the anticipated release would be in 2025. And over at EN World, it was reported that creators who tested the VTT on the laptops provided said that on Alienware laptops, which are high-end, the VTT was demanding. So we have these obstacles to attracting dungeon masters to the VTT. The time involved in preparing 3D maps. The cost involved in shortening that time involved in making 3D maps and adventures. There's probably going to be a cost to purchasing assets or a paid subscription plan. They would need to attract people to the VTT by indicating what it has over the competition. First, integration with D&D Beyond would be, for many, important. Also, they would like it to be the only place you can run D&D digitally. We saw them try early this year to revoke the OGL and limit the ability of other companies to create VTTs that run D&D. Although they did not revoke the OGL because of the outrage that elicited, they put out only a very limited subset of their rules into the Creative Commons and have the freedom not to license out on any acceptable terms the expanded player options and bestiaries to Roll20, Fantasy Grounds, and other VTTs. It remains to be seen how much they will try to monopolize through legal means the VTT space, but their plans did receive a blow at the beginning of the year. So what's left for the VTT to attract DMs? Well, it's the graphics. But as we just went through, does that have enough appeal to dungeon masters specifically so that they are willing to pay the money and or time to get a 3D experience, which is a mixed blessing, over competing VTTs like Roll20, Fantasy Grounds, Foundry, and Tailspire, which also is 3D and is system neutral. So that's the problems for the VTT on the Dungeon Master side of things. But that's not who Wizards of the Coast is thinking about primarily in serving and getting money from with their virtual tabletop. It's players. The commenters I showed on the screen earlier were not thinking about the fact that Wizards of the Coast has a very aggressive profit plan that expects an exponential growth in people playing Dungeons & Dragons and engaging with the brand. Onboarding current D&D groups is small potatoes. And we can kind of see that their hopes with the VTT is not really to create a good tool for current DMs. In fact, Dungeon Masters are an afterthought. And this is a screenshot from Gen Con, from the presentation made by the D&D designers on their playtest plan, where the first 9 Unearthed Arcana articles are all geared toward player options, giving tools to dungeon masters and making the game easier and more satisfying to run is literally an afterthought in their development for their next edition. And the only promotion we've seen for the VTT has been, doesn't it look cool?
We chose the Unreal Engine for several reasons.
Reason number 1, make it look dope.
In researching this video, I looked at Tailspire's Kickstarter page, and there was a lot of discussion about tools for GMs and what features they will present to the GM, while the timeline for WOTC's VTT prioritizes the player experience. This is all completely in keeping with Hasbro's announced plan of Blueprint 2.0 to increase profit 50% over the next 3 years between that announcement at the end of 2022 and the end of 2025. And I apologize in advance for the long passages of corporate babble that I'm about to expose you to. Basically, the prioritizing of players and chasing video gamers. In 2008, it was World of Warcraft players. In 2023, it's all of the people who play video games and are willing to pay microtransactions. This should be no surprise to anyone who's been listening to what Hasbro Corporate has been saying since last year. And it's always good to rely on primary sources in general. So I'm going to play a few minutes from their fireside chat, which was in December 8th of 2022, where Cynthia Williams, CEO of Wizards of the Coast, and Chris Cox, CEO of Hasbro, gave a talk to investors. When listening to what they're saying, keep in mind who their audience is. To prepare yourself for this, feel very greedy. Don't think in terms of millions of dollars, think of billions of dollars. Think about the overall average global consumer. Don't know much about D&D. It's just another profitable game like Monopoly or Call of Duty. I think it's going to be very clear listening to this what their plans for D&D and the virtual tabletop are.
How do you digitize a game that's been around for 50 years, right? Magic, D&D is obviously older than Magic. And along with that, perhaps we can touch on how the integration of D&D and Beyond is going, growth in transactions or whatever you could share.
D&D has never been more popular, and we have really great fans and incredible engagement. But the first thing I saw with it is the brand is really under monetized. Earlier this year, we acquired D&D Beyond, and we're really excited about the possibilities the platform provides and the positive momentum we've already seen. We made this acquisition to strengthen our connection to players and to power our next phase of product development, user acquisition, and to have live service tools through which we gain really valuable data-driven insights. With DDB, we have a window into how fans are playing the game daily. Even if they're playing around the dining room table, many of our D&D fans use Dungeons & Dragons Beyond as a companion app on their phone to make the experience better. And this gives us a look at how people are playing in their homes that we never had before. And so when we think about our future monetization, we start here. Dungeon masters, which are the people who guide you through the adventure, they only make up about 20% of the audience, but they are the largest share of our paying players. For the rest of the players at the table, we believe digital will allow us to offer a lot more options to create rewarding experiences post-sale that helps us unlock the type of recurrent spending you see in digital games, where more than 70% of the revenue in digital gaming comes post-sale. The speed of digital means that we're able to expand from what is essentially a yearly book publishing model to a recurrent spending environment, and we're offering content that we know fans want.
And they are, of course, referring to the purchase of D&D Beyond for $146.3 million. So they hope to make at least that amount and more through some mechanism. Next, we have Chris Cox on the call, CEO of Hasbro. He's going to talk about the hugeness of the untapped potential that D&D has as a brand and how they plan to leverage that. And he, of course, refers to his research, something that he thinks his audience can relate to, which is cocktail parties.
D&D, when I go to cocktail parties and I say, and people ask me, what do I do? What I used to say is, hey, I was president of Wizards of the Coast, and they'd say, what's that? And I'd say, well, we make Magic the Gathering, and then we make Dungeons and Dragons. I'd have maybe a 3 in 10 hit rate on people understanding what Magic was, but if I did, I would have an incredibly deep conversation, and the cocktail party would effectively be over for all other participants. Or like for D&D though, it was 10 out of 10. Everyone knows D&D. Everyone grew up with it in the 70s and 80s, played the video games in the 90s and early aughts, and knows it's a cultural phenomena right now. The D&D strategy, if the Magic strategy is a deep single quadrant strategy, the D&D strategy is a broad 4-quadrant strategy where we have this powerful brand that has similar awareness to like Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, and we're going to imbue it with blockbuster entertainment like we have with the movie coming up, AAA, true AAA high-end gaming like we're going to have with Baldur's Gate 3 next year, and then just an amazing set of products that we will activate as Hasbro across our blueprint, whether that's what we're doing at D&D Beyond, what we're doing at hobby stores with new books and accessories, or what our consumer products team and licensing team are doing to build out a host of new collectibles and toys and games for a more casual fan.
Next year, Hasbro has a much better film slate, including the scheduled release of Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves on March 31st, I think, 2023. How do you define success with that film outside of the obvious kind of movie proceeds and upside to that economics? What would it mean for the D&D franchise? How do you define that success?
To me, the D&D film is the first big light up opportunity for that powerful 4-quadrant brand. You know, the D&D film should, by all accounts, we feel like it's going to have a healthy box office. It's going to have significant marketing. I think we're going to be able to light up D&D awareness. We're going to be able to activate that awareness with a host of products at retail, gaming, and online. And then we're going to follow it up. We're going to follow it up with a host of video games that we license out and work with like great partners like Larian, with Baldur's Gate 3 that we develop ourselves, and then follow that up with a host of new entertainment.
So this 4-quadrant strategy is clearly, they envisioned that the movie would generate lots of interest in D&D and that people would want to have their Chris Pine action figures and plush toys of the iconic monsters. Given that the film underperformed compared to their ambitions, much more rides on their video game plans. And here they talked about Baldur's Gate 3 and games that they would develop themselves. And for Hasbro's ambition of increasing its profits by 50% in 3 years, Wizards of the Coast is the darling of Hasbro. Here's an article about how Wizards of the Coast's profits exceed those of Hasbro's toy business, and on its own had a 46% operating profit margin, which is huge. It generated 75% of Hasbro's profit. But within Wizards of the Coast, Cynthia Williams and Chris Cox put heavy emphasis on D&D being the future for Wizards of the Coast. The talk was called a fireside chat, referring to the wartime radio talks of Franklin Roosevelt during the Great Depression and later World War II. This fireside chat was timed to assure investors who had just read that Bank of America had downgraded Hasbro as an investment due to its mismanagement of Magic the Gathering. So they put heavy emphasis on D&D being a segment of their portfolio that will experience explosive growth.
As excited as I think Cynthia and I are for Magic's growth potential over the coming mid and long term, I think D&D could be a real new leg in the stool for our gaming portfolio as a whole and for Wizards specifically. Like, to me, Dungeons and Dragons is the real poster child for Blueprint 2.0, our overall corporate engagement story, which is doubling down on play, supercharging play with great storytelling and entertainment, and focusing on a category that we're an early leader in, the best innovator in, and have every right to win and grow our profitability and grow our return to shareholders. So consider me long on D&D.
Oh, fantastic. That's a great note to end this call on.
Now, he mentioned a host of new video games. Well, 5 of them were canceled at the start of the year. And they say that they will be focusing on games which are strategically aligned with developing our existing brands, strongly suggesting that this includes D&D. So, given the tenor of these talks by their own leadership and their recent nearly $150 million purchase of D&D Beyond, it's pretty clear that they're banking on D&D Beyond and its associated virtual tabletop. And it's pretty clear that they want players, not DMs, but players. They want access to players' wallets. The kind of exponential growth they're looking for is simply not possible without some way to serve that exponential increase in human players. And that requires, normally, dungeon masters and people coming into D&D who are excited by it from playing Baldur's Gate 3, watching the movie, will not be inclined to DM or have the know-how to do so. Wizards of the Coast needs a way for players to be able to play D&D without a DM. And this is where we get to AI. And I expect people to ask, well, how do you know they're going to do this? And I would counter by saying, how could they not do this? Because of course they would. It's well known that there is a dungeon master shortage in D&D spaces, and that this is limiting the number of people who can play the game. There is a burgeoning industry of people charging to be game masters in TTRPGs. I am one of them, though running a different system. And we also now know that they are partnering with a company to introduce AI into tabletop gaming. They might just create a gaming lobby for people to meet up with strangers or their friends to play an adventure like Curse of Strahd, an adventure that would have some reactivity assisted by AI. Maybe the players can prompt the VTT to create a hexploration map where they can explore different areas, hack and slash, gather loot. Maybe that hexploration map could be a well-loved and well-established campaign setting like Greyhawk. Or maybe they can explore the continent of Chult, where the Tomb of Annihilation's location is randomized. And maybe third-party developers would have the opportunity to upload their own adventures. Now, on the ethics of AI DMs, I am a political activist who one would call very left-wing. And I think there are many instances where AI should be opposed. In the Hollywood strike right now, AI is being touted among entertainment executives as a way to replace creatives and replace actors. And actors and writers are justifiably opposing and fighting that effort. By and large, AI development for people who hold the purse strings has been a way to look into how to replace people. And in the area of art, it is absolutely going to lead to a downgrade in crappy productions. Because let's face it, although we're often exposed to subpar and mediocre entertainment and television and streaming services by human beings, few of us would want a future where human beings are replaced. So there are certain spheres where AI is being pushed as a way to destroy people's livelihoods in the pursuit of profit and drive down the quality of what we as a society enjoy. However, in the area of DMing, I'm not necessarily against AI, and I'm willing to be corrected if I'm wrong, and I welcome comments. Because unless there's something I'm not aware of, having a company provide artificial intelligence DMs is not replacing DMs per se. It's not eliminating the demand for a real human being. It would be the equivalent of sex toys and pornography. They're not really going to lower the demand for the real thing. Let's be real. It seems like the net result of AI would be to allow more players to play D&D and other tabletop role-playing games. Also, there are ways that I'm sure I'm not thinking of right now in which AI could assist dungeon masters. The success of services like Describe, which helps creativity-starved DMs come up with descriptions of things and story seeds, shows that there is a need and that DMs want to have digital tools. Also, in the context of a VTT, it seems like it would be pretty damn useful to be able to give a prompt, say, give me a tavern with 2 floors with an inn on the 2nd floor, set at nighttime with a fighting pit on the 1st floor, and it comes up. In fact, a AI-assisted tool to create maps like that might be less aggressive monetization-wise than charging me to go to a online store to find the exact map I want, which would only be usable for that one purpose. It would also be great to be able to prompt a VTT to create me a level 5 deadly encounter that includes a Banshee. Of course, it would need to not follow WOTC's encounter building guidelines, but you get the picture. There's a place for AI, like any technology, to improve our lives. However, we're talking about Wizards of the Coast here. So I think it's important to set out a few general principles with regard to AI that I propose to people and consumers for now. The use of AI should not be supported if it is to displace workers. If it steals assets, much of the controversy around AI-generated pictures right now is that it trawls the internet and steals the works of artists without their consent, awareness, or compensation. If Wizards of the Coast were to use AI in its VTT, the assets would need to be produced in-house. And third, it should not lead to crappier content, which definitely would be true in Hollywood, and in the case of tabletop RPGs, should be used to enhance the play experience instead of cheapen it. And also, while we're talking about AI, I also need to acknowledge the truth that artificial intelligence cannot match a human DM. And this is, after all, a creative hobby. The appeal of D&D and other tabletop role-playing games is the reactivity, the creativity, the possibilities that are involved when you have a human dungeon master. And also to get away from the isolation that our modern lives and digital media often create for us. And to be honest, I don't know if AI can do much, at least in its current state right now. Sure, maybe an AI can simulate a conversation with that barkeep, but would it be able to handle creative solutions from players? What if, for example, in a Curse of Strahd AI-run adventure, the players want to befriend Strahd and rule Barovia with him? But some might object that's not what video gamers want. They want a straightforward experience. They want to get the adventure advertised on the tin. People don't necessarily want to team up with the bad guy or run a business or run for mayor in the town. Just give them some of that old hack and slash. Well, sure, an AI can generate a randomly generated encounter and maybe generate a random cave complex, but in the end, to make compelling gameplay, you need to have story. You need to have structure to adventures and have connections between quests. That kind of has to be done by human beings. While Curse of Strahd has non-linear sandbox qualities, the locations and adventures that people enjoy in that module were all handcrafted. And in the end, for massive multiplayer RPGs to be successful, we've seen that they've had to continually pump out new locations and quests periodically. In the end, Wizards of the Coast need to create a compelling video game experience, and unless AI makes another leap, they're compelled to make quality content. And in that department, in the meantime, Baldur's Gate 3 is stealing their fire. AI can make a reactive experience happen for cheap, but it's not going to match the crafted reactivity that you find in Baldur's Gate 3. And for ambitious modders, and let's be real, they exist, look at the work that modders have done for a variety of other games like Skyrim, they may very well be more attracted by Baldur's Gate's 3 engine than by Wizards of the Coast's VTT. So those creations are also going to be competing for the video gamers that Wizards of the Coast hopes to attract with its video game. And this all dramatizes Wizards of the Coast's problem that I started talking about in the last video. The point of my previous video wasn't that WOTC's VTT will replace Baldur's Gate 3 for DMs looking for a way to run D&D. It was about how Baldur's Gate 3 massive success is going to affect Hasbro's plan to video gamify Dungeons & Dragons and their plan to make it attractive enough so that they can charge the prices that they want to charge to meet their ambitious profit goals. And if they don't meet that goal, will Hasbro consider it a failure and shut it down? They are absolutely focused on what they hope to be an exponential growth in players looking for a way to play D&D without a DM, on how they can get more people playing D&D through their VTT. They cannot start their own Baldur's Gate 4. That would take many years, and several of their current video game projects they just shut down. Meanwhile, Larian might not want to be attached to D&D for their next game. They now have the name recognition to make a game separate from D&D. So at least for the next couple of years, the time frame of Blueprint 2.0, they are relying on D&D and its VTT. So that's their plan. And this takes us to the point of the last video. Despite their public statements to the current player base, their eyes are on the bigger potential player base that they hope is now lit up by the movie and the video game. Making a VTT that serves DMs and making their system more friendly to DMs is all secondary. They want more players. And Baldur's Gate 3, in their eyes, is supposed to generate interest in D&D and get people to want to check out D&D and its video gamification, the VTT, for that next D&D fix. And because most people can't just run a game suddenly, they want the opportunity to have DM-less games on that VTT. But that's where Baldur's Gate 3 itself and the modding community around it comes in and will frustrate this vision. Although Baldur's Gate 3 will not have an official Game Master mode, it was acknowledged in the last video and in this article that it is possible to develop one. Even without a Game Master mode, there will be ambitious modders, just as there have been for other successful video game RPG franchises, who will be creating content in an arguably better video game experience than what the VTT would provide. And on top of all that, it would not have microtransactions. And that is the death knell for Wizards of the Coast's plan. Either their VTT would have to be somehow better than what Baldur's Gate 3 and its modding community provide, or they'll have to drastically drive down their profit expectations. It would become like one of those many MMOs that came out after World of Warcraft that hoped to replicate its success, but eventually had to lower the price, and in the case of many MMOs, actually became free to play. Sure, some Dungeon Masters might be happy with the VTT and are willing to put in the time to make 3D maps and or pay the price of getting assets to make that process easier, but there's a danger that WOTC does not view it as profitable enough to maintain. So yeah, Baldur's Gate 3 is great for players and great for people who want to enjoy D&D, but it's kind of bad for Wizards of the Coast. And before the next angry comment, whether Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro succeed and whether you are a satisfied player or game master, those don't have to be the same thing. There are many ways to play D&D that don't involve using Hasbro's virtual tabletop, including many excellent VTTs, and there are many other excellent RPGs. So that's it. But I want to make another point. To the corporate heads of Hasbro and the people who invest in Hasbro, Dungeons & Dragons is just one segment of what they call a gaming category. Video games and tabletop role-playing games to them are the same thing. But tabletop role-playing games offer something unique. Dungeons & Discourse puts it very well, and I'm going to play a short clip.
People like role-playing games because, well, they do something that video games can't. They are built with brains, and worlds made by DMs that are shaped around players and react to player actions. In other words, the entire hobby of role-playing is incredibly creative, and this level of creative freedom is rare in other forms of entertainment, and it allows for an infinite variety of experiences. Something that a digital platform struggles to replicate because of the central problem that the more you try to represent in the virtual space, the less room for that creative freedom is left. Fully 3D immersive digital tabletop experiences sort of miss the point of what makes D&D fun.
And for many of us who've had to transition to online play with the pandemic, we see the challenge of using VTTs that are not 3D. It offers great advantages, but it also creates some limitations on improvisation and creativity. For many GMs who run online, they see the VTT as a necessary evil. And just to show a screenshot from the trailer for the VTT that came out a few months ago, it looks very nice, but this also kind of could have been represented in a 2D virtual tabletop. And the visual appeal of eye-popping graphics, again, we already have in video games. The unique appeal of tabletop role-playing games is not that you can have a 3D rendered representation of a tavern, but it's the fact that you can look your dungeon master in the eye who's portraying your barkeep and talk to them, and that DM has the freedom to respond any way they want. It's the human interaction and not the interaction with screens that makes tabletop role-playing games unique. But Wizards of the Coast is literally trying to sell D&D as a human-run video game that might not have the human. A strange hybrid that is arguably the worst of both worlds. Now, not to rule out that for some dungeon masters, having a 3D space will enhance what they're trying to go for with their games, but that is going to come at significant time and cost. And Wizards of the Coast will almost certainly make this expensive. Meanwhile, there exist other virtual tabletops like Tailspire that offer 3D and are not as expensive. And for video gamers, there already are experiences out there like Baldur's Gate 3 that are dedicated to providing that experience and already give a full game without any microtransactions. And for those who want more of that experience, modding will exist. So that's the true end of my video. I have been Ronald the Rules Lawyer. If you've enjoyed my content, definitely like and subscribe for future videos, and join my Discord community where we talk role-playing games. I'm a Pathfinder 2e focused channel, and that's what most people on my Discord talk about, but we also talk about developments in the TTRPG industry and other gaming as a whole. And also support my Patreon. It allows me to continue making videos for this channel, and you get early access to many of my videos and exclusive access to many videos, including my series running Pathfinder 2e for D&D YouTubers. So that's it. I have been Ronald the Rules Lawyer. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.